Meeting has started.
Welcome, everyone. We'll be getting started in just a few minutes. I'm going to give time for people to come in. And we still have quite a few people making their way in, so we'll just give it another minute or so before we kick off. Okay, I'm going to get started. Jason, we are recording, yes?
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to CoachSource's Wednesday, First Friday webinar for September. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm Mary Dombrowski, SVP of Client Engagement with CoachSource, leading both our current client service teams as well as creating new client partnerships. For those of you not familiar with CoachSource, we are the largest pure-play global executive coaching firm. We've been in business for 18 years and have over 1,200 coaches globally that we deploy for leadership transformation, typically at the director level and above, including C-suite and board. CoachSource hosts webinars such as this typically on the first Friday of every month. Obviously, this Wednesday gathering is an exception. At CoachSource, we believe that inspiring leadership transforms organizations. Our monthly gatherings are dedicated to empowering HR business partners and leaders of talent with insights, strategies, and expert guidance on leveraging executive coaching to drive organizational excellence. And if you have any specific topics you'd like to see us cover, feel free to email me at mary@coachsource.com. We'd love to hear from you. Today, very exciting, Brian Underhill, CoachSource founder and CEO, Jeff Nally, CoachSource CHRO and Chief Coaching Officer, and I are joined by Woody Woodward, Director of the Coaching Innovation Lab at NYU, author of The Digital Coaching Revolution, and host of the recent Technology in Coaching Summit at NYU this past June. So Woody is here to share his insights on AI and technology in coaching. Our discussion is going to run for about 45 minutes, after which we'll open the floor for Q&A, and we welcome you to use the chat for questions that you have as we move along, and we'll do our best to address those in real time. Before we get started, Woody, welcome. Would you like to add anything to your introduction?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And Brian and Jeff, it's always so good to see you guys. We bump into each other multiple times a year, every year, bouncing from conference to conference. And of course, the summit at NYU. I also want to make sure that I do take responsibility for this being on a Wednesday and not a Friday. I apologize to all the audience and your faithful viewers, attendees. So just so you know, my day job is that I'm a professor at New York University, where I launched and I now lead our Master of Science degree in executive coaching and organizational consulting. And so this week is actually our immersion week, where we just welcomed our fifth cohort, our fifth academic year of graduate students to the master's program. So it's a really exciting milestone to be here in New York, greeting our fifth year of students, which is just really, really cool. And they're a wonderful group. Today was day 2. So yes, Friday I'll be engaged all day. So that's why I wasn't able to make that work. So I appreciate your flexibility. And again, I accept responsibility for all.
We're just happy to have you here. And I'm sure our attendees are as well. So before we kick off, just to add a caveat that, as I said at CoachSource, our focus is on coaching at the director level and higher. So most of our discussion today will be through that lens of looking at what's in the best interest of executives seeking to grow and learn in leadership. A lot of the AI tools talk around the democratization of coaching at all levels of the organization. We're just going to focus it a little bit higher around executive coaching. So let's kick off with a question for our attendees, and you can put right in chat. We're interested in knowing how many of you are formally using AI in your leadership development practices. And if you look at a scale to 1 to 5, where 5 is the company is ready to or is incorporating AI and technology in coaching, or I'm getting some feedback, or 1 is that my company doesn't know how to incorporate that in. Where would you say your organization is? And you could just pop it in chat. We have a 1. Some responses coming in. So we're looking at the lower half of the scale, it seems, mostly. Okay, so we'll continue to take some input in. And Brian, now I'll turn it over to you to start kicking off with our guest questions.
Hello, everyone. This is Brian Underhill, and we are again super excited to have Woody here, who's really got to be the top #1 expert in this whole area of AI and coaching. But Woody, I know we're going to talk executive coaching most of this time, but let's just talk coaching in general. What is the overall landscape? Some people here may have no knowledge of AI's role at all in coaching. So maybe could you just give a general overview to what role is AI currently playing in coaching, any forms of coaching, executive and other as well?
Yeah, sure. I wouldn't say I'm the top expert. I do follow the space as an academic at NYU as part of my work. So look, I'm trying to learn just like everybody else. At the end of the day, it's the one thing I always remind everybody is that AI, just as a technology, and certainly AI in the coaching space, is continually evolving and developing. So what we talk about today could be upended tomorrow. Literally, it can be that fast. It is rapidly evolving. So it's important just that caveat. So I think we all try and do our best to keep up. When you talk about the landscape, it's interesting. So back in 2022, we launched our first coaching and technology summit at NYU. And the idea behind that was to try and get our arms around what was going on in the digital tech space, right?
Mm-hmm.
We weren't really thinking about AI or talking about AI that much. It was more like, look, we know the BetterUps, the Ezras, the Coach Hubs of the world were really coming on, growing rapidly. COVID was really an accelerant for them, if I'm allowed to say the C word. We don't talk about that anymore. It wasn't exciting. I don't want to re-traumatize anybody. But it was an accelerant, right? And we saw them coming on. And so at NYU, we want to be as close to the leading edge of what's going on as possible. So we said, why don't we bring these folks together, as well as guys like you and other premier coaching service providers out there who are paying attention to the space and also thinking about integrating technology themselves, like I know you guys have done too. So that was our idea, right? Let's bring these folks together. The big joke was it was a frenemy conference because we had a lot of competitors. But look, I always told my dean, I'm like, it's coaching. We're all cool. We get along, and I do believe that for the most part, right? It was fun to see founders, Brian, like yourself, and entrepreneurs who have built businesses around coaching come together and talk about what they were doing. So fast forward, we go a year later, and we're like, whoa, AI? What's this AI thing? And here's the thing. When we talk about the landscape, all the major players were talking about the democratization of coaching. So I know, Brian, you mentioned that, right? And this idea of bringing coaching to the masses. I very much pushed back and disputed that term a lot, because when I kind of got under the hood, what I saw was you're democratizing coaching in Fortune 500 for employees that are interested and that can buy a license, right? Or employers.
Mm-hmm.
I don't call that democratization personally. I think it's just expanding the use of coaching within corporate, which is fine. I have no issue with doing that and building those offerings. But the challenge is, how do you scale a fundamentally human endeavor, which is coaching, and maintain quality? I know this is something all of you guys pay a lot of attention to. You have to vet your coaches, you have to monitor, you have to supervise and make sure that they're providing quality. If you expanded, tenfold tomorrow the number of coaches, you would have issues, right? And so I always question, how are you going to really manage quality, and how can you truly democratize coaching? So Brian, that was my initial look at the landscape, right? You had digital providers trying to expand the amount of coaching services offered, but I also believe they expanded the umbrella of services that we call coaching. And I think that was really a reaction to the market, where during COVID, companies were saying, look, we need help with people, our managers, leaders, even individual contributors dealing with stress, dealing with isolation, dealing with adapting to personal protective equipment, who had to be physically on manufacturing lines in retail stores. And we just don't know what to do. We can't equip our managers. Training just really isn't helping all that much. What are services we could provide? So then you saw, well, there's like spot coaching, right? There's like, I'd say SME or subject matter expert kind of coaching. I say phone an expert, phone a friend. They had lots of different offerings they were putting out there. How to manage stress, your stress coach, your sleep coach, and so on, right? So I think they expanded and offered a lot of different stuff out there beyond what we would consider in the traditional realm of professional coaching services, and certainly beyond the C-suite of executive level coaching services. So I don't want to ramble too much, but does that make sense as sort of a starter, our starting point?
Yeah, we started with the platforms. In the first year of your conference, I wasn't there, but I know that was really the big focus. And then I came to year 2 of 3, where now we started to see AI tools and see them demonstrated on the stage. There was a number of those there. And then, of course, this past year, it was all AI, I think, for the vast majority of the conversations. But then let me ask this. So now we go to executive level coaching. And are you seeing any applications of AI for executives, for executive level coaching? Are you seeing any of these tools being used there yet?
So yes, and lightly so. So a couple of things. One, going to year 2, Brian, if you'll remember, one of the most fascinating moments that stuck out to me is when I was talking about human coaches. And I got checked by a colleague, probably sometime competitor of yours, who said to me, Woody, do you realize that we've just said human coaches like 4 or 5 times? When have we ever had to qualify a coach as being human? That was a noteworthy moment because I was doing it subconsciously. We were really talking about the idea of coach bots and the development of coach agents or GPT driven coaches. And it was sort of a strange, like, oh, wow, really? Did I just do that? I'm sorry that I've just, put a stamp on this and said, yes, it's a thing, by talking about having to qualify us here as human coaches as different. And I remember it was funny, and I reflected and thought a lot about that. Fast forward a year later, as you mentioned, we're demoing actual coach bots live conducting coaching. And it's like, that's how quickly the space evolved. Now, one thing I do want to say, in fairness to our profession, there were a handful of developers building AI coaches easily 2 years before ChatGPT was released. So some of you guys might have been familiar with Coach Vici, which is Nikki Terblanche out of South Africa, Pocket Confidant, Olivier Malfon, in France, Rocky AI, that's Harry Novak, I think, out of Rome. Of course, Rebecca Rutschman out of Germany's got very different variations. I think she has now Alpina. So they were working on this, but a lot of that work got upended really fast, right? Because of the power and the large language models that and the convenience of using a ChatGPT now 4.0 to be able to develop these on your own. So just to kind of update everybody, that's sort of the rapid evolution, I think. And ICF, where, full disclosure, I'm on the board of the ICF Thought Leadership Institute. ICF's research team, if you guys know Joel DiGirolamo, who heads research for ICF, had been on top of that and working with them to develop AI standards before ChatGPT came out. And for those of you who don't know, he released them preliminarily. It's a 100-page document. I'll give you fair warning. Where ICF actually has standards for developing AI tools. So we should know that, because I have not seen really a standards document written by standards professionals, technical standards professionals, released really that with a lot of credibility from a global organization like this. So it's important to know that the work is being done and it's out there, because everyone's going to have to make choices, Brian, about, am I going to use this? Am I going to buy this? Am I going to adopt this? Am I going to accept and allow this when a client wants me to use it, and so on. So we're evolving quickly. But we're now in the age of, ChatGPT, which is OpenAI. You have Claude from Anthropic. You have Gemini from Google. You have Pi, and so on. So there are so many different ones, and there's some other European ones as well. So it's an arms race right now, without a doubt. And that's the thing that everyone needs to pay attention to, is these are evolving quickly. One of the things that I did earlier, I can't believe it was actually earlier this year, it was in February. I went online on the GPT store and just found something that said coach. Like, it's called Coach. All right, this is what younger people are going to go look for, right? So I found it and I tested it and I did a demo in front of a live audience at a conference in Austin, Texas, at Society for Consulting Psychology. Wait, you were there, right? And so it was, so in context, right? The larger point I was trying to make to that's a small professional group was, we like to believe there are a lot of pockets of us that know what coaching is, that define coaching. That's great. We have evidence to back up. Certainly those of us that come out of the psychology field, and IO and consulting psychology, some from behavioral sciences. But guess what? Oftentimes, and I think the digital platforms showed us this, the market will define, entrepreneurs start to redefine terms and professional practices. And so when you see stuff being built and released online by people who don't know anything about coaching, and calling it coach and getting put out there, it's a word of caution, right? So one of my students took a video of that, of me being coached live on stage, and you guys probably saw it. I got a lot of grief on that one. A lot. I posed just the question, oh, what do you think? Look at what this is doing, right? It was clunky. It was very advisory. There was some latency and pause, some weird interruption. All that's gone, by the way, guys. All that's been taken care of, right? Just in like 8 months, 9 months. So, but what happened is I just posed a question, and a lot of people had visceral reactions, and a lot of it coming from the fear of an existential threat, like, oh my God, this thing's going to take my job. At the very basic level of coaching, there is research out there that has demonstrated equivalent efficacy of goal attainment and staying on goals and achieving goals from a text-based AI coach versus a human coach, right? That's early days. We're early days in a lot of this research, right? So we have to be careful. But Brian, sorry, back to your question, but I wanted to give that sort of background. At the executive level, at the more nuanced level, right? The kind of coaching that I still do professionally, the kind of coaching that I grew up doing. And by the way, my day job is training professional executive coaches. I think AI is still pretty far away from that, because there's a lot of context. There's a lot of nuance. There's understanding the players that your executive is working with. I used to be an embedded coach. I would actually fly with one of my executives. I would actually sit in meetings and do observations. I would do one-on-one sort of 180, 360 type interviews with people that he worked with and so on, to get a lot of context and data and information to really give rich feedback to that executive. At the highest white glove end, I still don't think you're going to see AI replacing a coach there. At the very model-based coaching, in other words, what I mean by that is formulaic coaching. So where you can follow like a grow model type process, which is a great basic process for both within session and the arc of a session, depending on how you deploy the model, as well as other various sort of similar types of models. There is evidence that an AI can actually do that reasonably well. So we have to think about that. Now, at the executive level, you'd be crazy not to be thinking about how to integrate some AI technologies to provide enhanced services or gather data, right? So, for example, and I'm full disclosure, like Ovita is a technology we use at NYU to train our coaches. I'm an angel investor in Ovita and an advisor, but because that came from the fact that I had such great experiences with them, I got more engaged. That video capture technology captures data on the conversation, on meeting ICF markers, by the way, we can do that now, on what was agreed to in the meeting, on creating transcripts, on feedback on body language, a lot of other data points that are more objective. You could use that in coaching sessions to capture data on yourself as a coach to make sure that you are doing, to check yourself, right? Because athletes all sports are reviewing video on themselves. In coaching, we don't do it at all. We rely on our own self-reflection. That's great. I believe in reflection. It is wholly an incomplete way of evaluating yourself because it's through your own lens. So that's one example, right, of a technology. Other are nudging technologies. I think there are technologies around capturing feedback. So another company I worked with, Loop, is where you could deploy surveys, simple surveys like a few questions in the motion of work to people who experience your client, get real-time feedback and get that in a couple days before your next session to say, hey, here's something we're working on. Here's what the people who work with you are saying about how they're experiencing you versus you relying on your client to tell you. And that data is aggregated by an AI and qualitatively bucketed out to different themes. So I'm just giving you a couple examples of ways you can enhance your service with an executive, nudging technologies, capturing when you've attained goals, other objective measures that you have access to. So I'll stop there, but I think there's replacement maybe at the model-based level. I wasn't saying that a year ago. I'm seeing a lot of the technologies. I'm working with them now. So think about, this is where we are in the conversation. Democratizing coaching, that concept has come back around with AI. Now I look at it differently.
Thanks for that. That's really helpful, Woody. Let's talk about another stakeholder in companies and organizations. So you have a coach coaching a senior leader, a senior executive. What AI technology related to coaching and development of executives should talent leaders, CHROs, HR business partners, the people leading succession management, all the people inside companies that we work with that have decided there needs to be a senior level coaching engagement connected to other things that we're doing to develop senior executives. What should those talent experts and leaders inside companies be looking for, or at least be familiar with respect to AI and coaching and executive development?
Yeah, I think data and feedback, without a doubt. I think you can get more real-time feedback, evaluative data on how the particular client or coachee, in this case, right, is performing. And I think to be fair, there are always so many different variables that can impact all sorts of data and measures, right? So you guys know this is better than I do. You always got to be careful what you're on the hook for, right? Because market forces, change in roles, change in teams, change in priorities, direction, all that stuff can impact what you're working on with the client, well, without question, right? So you have to be cognizant of that. But at the same time, if you can get a combination of regular feedback from those experiencing that particular coachee in their natural habitat, right, in the flow of their work, and get that to the coach and automate that as much as you can, right, and have AI assess and analyze, particularly qualitative or text data. So you don't need people to do a lot of ratings. I think some ratings are helpful, right? But ratings without context aren't all that useful. So can you just type in your experiences, just free form, write it. And the AI can quickly assess and analyze what would take us, you guys have done, the old days.
Hours and hours.
Feedback, hours and hours of reading feedback reports and all the open-ended question stuff. No, mean,
Yeah.
I've used GPT-4o for various versions of that. It's amazing how quickly and accurately it can take qualitative data, in other words, just text-based written responses, and aggregate it and put it into themes that you can be actionable, right? So that, as well as what other objective measures are your talent leaders using through their talent marketplace or their HRIS systems that you can also find ways to get access to, and then nudging technologies, right? Because you guys know this. Here's the challenge. You're working with a coachee, and what happens? They're busy. They go back to the treadmill of life and their work. And so can you have automated nudges? Can you have automated reminders? When you're having a coaching session, the AI, most of us use transcribers, right? That can aggregate, or if you've used Copilot, I think we're doing Teams today, right? And Copilot can break down, here's what happened, here's what was agreed to, and nudge you. Hey, Jeff, by the way, here are the things you were going to work on, and here are some of the deadlines. Deadlines tomorrow, where are you with this, right? So the coach doesn't have to do that, and the coachee doesn't have to remember. So as much as you can automate through AI, I think you need to do it. It's not just generative conversational tools, right? It's nudging reminders.
I like the nudging. And as you said that, I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot I got to nudge one of my coachees to finish something he said he would do. Let me ask you.
Glad I can remind you of that.
Yeah, let's switch the conversation to one of bias, which we all know has been plaguing generative AI, perhaps. And in your conference, you had Matthew, is it Breitfelder? He was the global head of human capital at Apollo Global Management. That was a fantastic interview. And he raised like 3 big concerns he has with all of these different tools, one of which being that of bias and trying to reduce or control for it. What do you say as it relates to bias in these tools, and how are they doing thus far? How much work is there still to be done, et cetera?
I think there's always going to be a lot of work to be done in this place. And the thing to consider when looking at any of these technologies is, first of all, who are the creators? Who are creating these technologies? What is their orientation? What are their beliefs? What is their understanding, their philosophies? Also, who are they? What do they look like? Where do they come from? What are their lived experiences? It's important, and it's hard to get all that, but I mean, you need to start kind of drilling down to think about that first, right? So there's bias in everything. We all have bias. We have some that we're aware of, some that we're not aware of, because we're all limited in our experiences, right? Some more so than others, and some have more awareness than others, right? And what are they doing to mitigate that? Are they aware? Do they have internal controls that are reviewing potential for bias, and more importantly, potential for harm? So one of the things that does not get talked about enough is safety in AI. You hear it here and there. Mostly you hear it because somebody resigned over a safety issue from one of the major players. And I think bias, it's super important. And look, when you're looking globally, there's so many different beliefs and understandings, so many different cultural differences, so many different understandings of what is meant by diversity. We tend to have a very American-centric view here, no doubt about it, but we have to think beyond that. You guys are a global organization. As Mary said, the largest pure coaching play global provider in the world. And so we have to keep in mind diversity and bias, equity, all these things can be very different depending on where you go, right? Or different understandings. And so I think that's where you have to ask the hard questions of where are these developers, creators coming from? And what are they actively doing to control? But honestly, as important, if not more important, what are the safety controls? Because AI does need to be monitored and supervised. AI has been demonstrated to hallucinate because when you look at a lot of how even the pre-generative AI technologies were based on reinforcement learning, sort of gamification. If I get this, I win that, right? I'm rewarded for this, I'm punished for that, right? And so reinforcement learning, I mean, I'm going back to like old school psychology here, but can have its limitations, and can cause, the AI really wants you to do to get that promotion, right? Or attain that goal. Is it going to start to forget about the boundaries that you live within, like in an organization, rules, cultural norms, and start possibly pushing you to violate certain things or go towards workarounds because it wants you to get to the goal, right? And the AI is rewarded for getting you there. So just like in humans, right? What you measure, hey, you motivate, and that also rings true in some of these technologies. So we have to be careful there. And also, at the end of the day, generative AI are really advanced language prediction machines, right? That's what they're able to do. And they're doing a lot of advanced associations of words and what words go together, what different meanings go together, and what you think it thinks you may be asking for. It misunderstands intent sometimes. So we have to pay attention to what are the safety controls and the safety protocols that some of these tools are deploying to make sure that it doesn't take someone down a dark or destructive path. And no different than a coach, but a coach usually can catch themselves if they're well trained. The AI, I just don't know right now.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I'd like to move over, Woody, to the privacy and security issue. And I'm going to ask the audience to put in chat on a scale of 1 to 10, how concerned your organizations are about maintaining privacy of coaching information, specifically topics discussed, content of the conversations, and the company information that might be discussed during coaching. So while we're getting those responses in, I'm just going to ask you, I noticed it wasn't discussed at the conference. And I spoke to Anna after, and she said that was a deliberate decision we made. But of course, then you were going to Berlin, where you have to discuss privacy. And we're a global organization, as you said. And so we have to operate on a global landscape, right? Not on a not just looking at what the US is. So what do you think that businesses in the US doing business globally should be aware of? And can you speak to the difference in the privacy concerns between the Europe and the US?
Yeah, Europe is certainly more progressive, more advanced when it comes to data protection and privacy for individuals. As you mentioned, GDPR, I want to say Generalized Data Protection Regulation, right? If that's, I think, the rough translation, if I remember what it stands for, has been around. They also have an AI Act and legislation in the EU that I think it's going to get really interesting because as part of the EU's regulation of AI, it's not supposed to mimic emotions or present as like as being human-like. So a lot of generative AI does that. So I'm not. It's going to be really fascinating to see the butting of heads of a lot of these rapid-moving Gen AI companies to with a lot of the protections and how those are interpreted in the EU. I do not pretend to be an expert on GDPR and the EU AI Act, so I'll leave that to others and attorneys. That's just what little I've heard about. In the U.S., laws around technology. What? You, I had a really fascinating conversation once with an attorney with a major publication, U.S. magazine, kind of a political magazine. And I was on a train ride, happened to be sitting next to this person, and she lost the lottery and sat next to chatty professor over here. And when she told me what she did, I was like, so I have a question for you, because you're talking about intellectual property and other things. And she said, Woody, intellectual property laws in the US pretty much, and social media, right? She's like, pretty much dates back to the 1920s and the 1930s, and mostly were authored by Disney lobbyists from that era, 20s and 30s. I was like, what? She said mostly it came from animation, animated movies, and that's where a lot of it originated. And she said maybe the Digital Millennium Act, which was really watered down, doesn't do a whole lot. I think that was 2000, did that right or so, or attempting to regulate like internet and social media, but mostly is really pretty meaningless, right? I mean, I think the most meaningful legislation for social media is you can't hold them accountable for what people post. Okay. So we're not good at that here, that's for sure. What I can tell you, a lot of global operators, probably just like yourself, are looking to, if they want to play globally, particularly in Europe, they want to prepare for the highest bar, which is GDPR. I know and Brian, remind me if I think it was 2 years ago, Mark Arian, the CEO of Korn Ferry Consulting, talked about them using GDPR really as their standard, knowing that it may get adapted and it has become the gold standard in other places. So go to the toughest one and build your protections around that, to be on the safe side. So that's what I'm seeing there. But Mary, I'm not an expert in data privacy. I don't think we have much of it in the US. I mean, every time I click on a site or any document or anything I use, it's like, we use cookies, decline. Okay, so you can't do this. We won't let you on. I'm like, what? So much is being, I mean, how many times have you picked up your phone after a conversation, you're like, get an ad for something, you're like, I was just talking about that. That's interesting, right? I mean, so there are ways to turn that off, but so I'm not sure. Philosophically, I think we view privacy differently in the U.S. than in Europe.
Let me ask this question, Woody. So you've talked about, coaches using feedback tools or using like AI to take the stakeholder feedback and then put it in there to create a report. Let me ask this question. How do, in your view and your experience talking with organizations, how do companies and employers feel about, let's say, coaches taking their interview data, putting it into Chat GPT, even if they take the employee's name out and the company's name out, they anonymize the data, but it's still the company's information to then create a report that goes back into the organization. And let's say even the coach uses their own closed account where that data is not shared externally. What do companies think about external coaches using the tools like that to synthesize data and information, either for feedback or between the sessions that then goes back to the employee and the company?
Yeah, Jeff, I can't really speak to what, generally speaking, companies think. I don't know. I think it kind of depends. I can just give you my own opinion, and anecdotally, some of my experience is more comfort with using a closed system if you can demonstrate you have a closed system and a proprietary model, like a large language model that you're using to look at data. But it's really interesting because AI is developing and evolving quickly, and it is clearly seen as a competitive edge. And I absolutely believe that it is. The adaptation and use of AI is a competitive edge. And if you don't become a thoughtful and adapter with healthy skepticism, I would say, I think you're going to be in a lot of trouble because it is a force multiplier in so many ways. It can aggregate and develop proposals, recommendations in ways that are just too slow for us. So I think it's how you use it. It's how sophisticated you are as a user and how well you understand the protections of the tools you're using. But look, I think we'll have these interesting debates. I agree that are important about data and protection. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like social media. It's just going to blast forward quickly. And I think we'll have kind of a new way of thinking about what is held private, how do we manage that? But adaptation is going to move quickly. No,
Thanks. That's helpful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it has to. Yeah.
And can be scary. Yeah, imagine all your interview data goes in there and gets loose somehow. It's hacked or something. I'm not quite sure.
But Brian, think about how often do you read about a data breach, right, at a company?
Yeah,
and I get an email. It's like, hey, by the way, we got hacked, and 1 million of our users, whether it's a major bank or a major like credit reporting company and so on. So I believe all it's out there. I mean, that's like it's more like monitoring. I think it's kind of become the new ways. You got to be able to monitor and catch when data's been taken and used against you, because so much of we're so out there. I mean, look at your LinkedIn profile, how much information about you is on there, how much information about you is stored on all these different sites that have your credit card information, your social security number. Look at like I look at like my airline and hotel companies and what they have. I mean, so there's a duty, I think, to protect that. But it's going to be out there, no doubt.
Always. Yeah. Let me ask you, as we get towards the end of our questioning, Woody, one of the most intense moments of the conference, and we have a lot of coaches, trained coaches here. So our buddy Jonathan Passmore was on the stage, I think, with you and others, and he's a known professor. Yeah, he's a professor and works with Ezra right now. It just really provocateur at times. So I believe, and let's have you clarify this. You guys were basically saying, to some extent, AI has been shown to coach at the PCC level when analyzed by both humans and AI, determining if it coached at that level. You can clarify that with me. And then Jonathan Passmore said, how many of you are PCCs? And a whole bunch of us raised our hands, including me. And he says, you're going to be out of a job in 5 years. You need to move up. Yeah, move it up. So first of all, is that all accurate, what I just said? And what do we think about this?
I certainly did not say that AI is coaching at the PCC level. So I think Rebecca might have talked about that. She's developing something in her technology to attain that level. I don't remember if she said it's there or not. I certainly have never seen that. I've never seen anything that I would right now say is at the PCC level. Some of the data that Alex Heitiglu shared was that we've captured with Ovida that demonstrates that not nearly as many PCC coaches are actually operating at the PCC level based on the data we can capture on markers. So he did present that. And that was something I think that was something we all need to take a minute to think about, right? Because the data just is not showing that the majority of those who have that PCC are actually coaching it consistently at that level. That's why I'm an advocate for, I think, a lot more use of technology and supervision and reflection and feedback and so on. So yes, Jonathan did say, and I kind of was ribbing him about this online.
And then he took off and ran to a flight. Like he literally got out, went to the airport and left.
And got out quickly and left me there. Yeah. Thanks, Jonathan. He's great. That was the first time he and I got to meet in person, which was fun because he and I have collaborated on some things before and agree on some things, disagree on some things. I think he was being provocative. I'm not sure he necessarily is believing that, but I think he's speculating based on what we're seeing right now. I mean, if you want to just like map the trajectory of how rapidly the AI, generative AI, is getting better and better at interactive conversations, it's really fast. So is it reasonable to say in 5 years you could have something that could operate at that level? I think that's actually fair to say. Would it necessarily replace someone? I don't know, right? That's a hard one to say. Will it hit a ceiling at some point, like some technologies do? That's hard to say. I don't know. Will there be regulatory effects like what we see in the EU? Sure, right? In the US, I don't know, but other places, yeah, I think so. So there are a lot of factors at play, not just looking at Gen AI in a vacuum, right? It could really probably take off quickly, but there are going to be a lot of other market forces possibly questioning, constraining, restraining how some of this is developed.
And then I will say, I'm sorry, I said last thing, but this is the last thing. David Goldsmith was up there. He's a real classic veteran in our field, and he's done a lot of coach training. He said something really worth noting for all of us coaches. He says, many of us have not had anyone watch us coach since we got certified.
Yes.
And so therefore, how do we know we're still as effective? We probably have some bad habits. I was reflecting on that as a coach myself. And of course, some of us may avail ourselves of supervision, but he's pointing out that perhaps some of these tools, Ovida could be a great example, would be something to kind of help keep an eye on our techniques and so forth and make sure we're still coaching properly to the markers of a PCC, if that's what you are. So there could be great promise there for us to get better at our craft through AI.
Yeah, so there are, and that was kind of the Society of Consulting Psychology presentation I did was, here's AI when it doesn't work so well, and then here are use cases for AI that can actually help us get better. And I do believe that. And look, supervision rarely translates to observation.
Right, of
So
course.
so, it's helpful to me when I review my recordings. I review the recordings of my students. But what I find with my students using Ovita to review their recordings is they always go right away. They don't wait for me to get on, because I can get on and provide feedback and point out certain things at certain points during the video and the interaction based on whatever I've asked them to work on. What they just like to see data. And a coach observing you isn't really going to give you data. They're going to notice things that they're looking for, which is based on their orientation, their philosophy, or their style, which you have to be careful about, because all coach supervisors are going to have a bias towards their own style, beliefs, philosophy. But when there are objective data points we can capture, that can be really powerful. And I think we need that, as well as the human observer giving you feedback on very specific things that the AI won't capture.
Got it.
Yeah. Another thing that I just heard recently was somebody made the point that AI is very backward looking because it's been fed all of this data and information. And so when you think about how the environment, the work environment, business environment is moving so fast and is so complex, that there's only so much an AI is going to be able to do when you're dealing with a new situation, right?
Well,
I think.
how AI is trained. But Mary, that's such a great point to think about, right? AI, and it's not as much the technology, it's the models it's trained on, right? And the training data, right? Purely the technology is probably great. It's what is it trained on, right? And so it's trained on now backwards, right? Or a year ago backwards, right? Remember, that was originally ChatGPT was like a year old, a year out of date. It couldn't surf the web. Also, what is its orientations towards? What sources is it going to tend to go towards, right? So here's an example. This is a long time ago, but I was reading about training an AI on image recognition. So there was a group various groups have tried to train AI on images, image recognition. And this one group, they had this idea, well, how are we most like fair and equitable about images, right? And I think it was 2007 or 2008, right? They said, well, let's just train it. I think it was on the AP, Associated Press images, right? They're news organization. They're out there they're photographing news and what's going on. It's not like celebrity stuff. It's not. So what happened was that image recognition program had more images based on just the AP of George W. Bush than it did of all Black women combined. Now, think about that. What was going on during that time period? He was an outgoing president, right? I mean, so does it make sense that a U.S. president is highly photographed and in a lot of images in the Associated Press? Yes. I don't necessarily think that's a bias. That's just chasing news and what's going on, what they're doing, right? But that was a bad model to use, right? And so what is it oriented toward itself? Well, most people probably look like this guy. No. So, Mary, it's a great point, and that's one of the concerns that we have, right? Is how is the data, or how are these models or the tech tools being trained, and what kind of models?
Yeah. Wow, what a great conversation. Before we open the floor for questions from our attendees, we just want to remind our clients and our not yet clients that CoachSource is here as a thought leadership and strategic partner, and happy to continue to bring conversations like this to you. And if you are a current client and have any questions about privacy, security, the use of AI tools in your talent development initiatives, you're free to reach out to Brian, Jeff, me, or your CoachSource client service director. Our next First Friday will be Friday, October 4th at 11 a.m. Eastern. Two of our client service directors will be sharing insights from the Coach Forum that we're hosting in Dublin next week. And a recording of this session will be posted on our website at CoachSource.com. Woody, before we open for Q&A, do you want to take a minute to tell everybody about the 2025 conference?
Yes, so we're in the midst of planning. We had such a great year. We had over 300 people attend the annual NYU Coaching and Technology Summit, which we host here in Manhattan. Where I think look out for coming dates. I think we're going to be July 7th and 8th. We're moving it out because of space challenges and other planning challenges we're up against, because we are going to expand to 2 full days. And because of the numbers of people that we've had, we doubled in size in 2 years. So we've been trying to figure that out, because Manhattan is a very expensive place to host a conference, by the way, and we're not for profit. So we're working on that. The other exciting thing is to look forward to, and I'll make sure to share it with you guys and so you can share with your community. I partnered with ICF on what we're tentatively calling our global coaching and AI intelligence report, where we are asking a lot of the questions you guys were asking about adaptation of AI by enterprise globally, intent to invest, how they're using it, and so on. So we're excited about that. I'm hoping the first, our inaugural sort of pilot report will come out next month. And then we'll be doing it every year to look at trends in adaptation and use of technology by mid-sized to larger companies across the world.
And are you bringing the conference to Europe again as well? Would it be?
So we're looking at how to best do that, because we've had to move the Manhattan one. So we're trying to figure out where to. We'd like to go back to Berlin. Yeah, we'll have to. We're working on figuring that out.
Great. So if anybody has a question, feel free to raise your hand or type into chat. We can take it either way. I know we have more questions for Woody, so if people in the audience don't, we sure do.
Can I share one thing?
Yeah.
Mary, a great book that if you really want to kind of understand the history of how AI has been developed, it's called The Alignment Problem.
Okay.
I'm not in my office, otherwise I would hold it up. It came out actually in 2020, I think 2020, 2021, maybe in Europe. So before generative AI, but he's a professional technology writer, and he interviewed over 100 different AI technologists and researchers. And a lot of the book talks about the alignment problem, which is aligning an autonomous AI-driven agent with human values. And it's a heavy lift. It's very dense, but it's a really fascinating read.
Fantastic. And Paula has a question. How might we ensure that any AI tools ensure the privacy and security of sensitive executive data?
Yeah, I mean, right now, that's where if you're working with an executive, you have to really think about how you're going to deploy and use it, A, but B, the flip side of that is how comfortable are they going to be, right? I mean, I still have some executives only in person. I have some only on the phone, right? No way are they getting on a Zoom or a Teams. So, I think you got to kind of go executive by executive. I think younger executives, it will be different. I think because their adaptation and their orientation towards digital technology may be a little bit different, and their thoughts on privacy and philosophies may be a little different. But I think you got to find out from the provider what controls they have in place, what assurances can they provide you, and what that looks like. Just like the use of any kind of tool. I mean, this even goes back to like old school assessments. Is assessment data, personality data, strengths data from a tool, how is that being protected? How is the provider protecting it? So it's similar, I think, not as new of an issue, but it's bigger.
Okay. Are there any what do you think will be the next tools and trends that leaders and companies need to think about in regard to AI for executive and senior leaders? Is there anything on your radar that you see coming up?
I think using an AI as a form of an assistant, like kind of always on, capturing data in a meeting, practice as a practice tool, sometimes as a research tool. You guys probably saw one that was pretty cool at the summit this year was Udly, which is a I'd say it's a good tool for rehearsing or practicing interviewing, whether it's for a job or for a podcast or media. Those kind of things you can rehearse, and it gives you feedback and data on how you're approaching the conversation, your pace of conversation. So if you want to prep for a tough meeting or a board meeting, you can prompt it, right, to say, hey, be a really tough board member, and here are the kind of hard things to ask me and poke and prod me on, and you can kind of rehearse with it. You'll see use of that kind of stuff. Yeah, public speaking. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's Toastmasters is using it for that as well. So yeah, I think like as aids, as practice aids and feedback tools.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I have heard that too, that example actually of the board member being a tough board member, like using it as a real sounding board.
Yeah.
I just did that the other day in a note that we were putting out. What would somebody receiving this message have questions about or say back to get, what am I not covering in there? So yeah, that's really effective for that. Well, you have given us so much to think about today, Woody. So thank you so much for joining us. It's really been a pleasure. And we look forward to being at the Coaching Summit next year. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And be in touch if you have any questions or want some more information. So thanks again. We will see you next month.
Awesome. Thank you. It was a
Bye-bye.
pleasure being here.
Great. Thanks. Bye.